one of the things that we learned as we were writing this book, and speaking of soil, how much is going on underneath the ground that we don't know about. Those ideas and those groups and those seeds that are being planted and are germinating right now that we don't know about, so that we can trust and have some faith in the fact that the mystery is working beyond our sight right now.
You're listening to the Good Dirt Podcast. This is a place where we dig into the nitty-gritty of sustainable living through food, fashion, and lifestyle.
And we're your hosts, Mary and Emma Kingsley, the mother and daughter founder team of Lady Farmer. We're sowing seeds of slow living through our community platform, events, and online marketplace.
We started this podcast as a means to share the wealth of information and quality conversations that we're having in our world as we dream up and deliver ways for each of us to live into the new paradigm, one that is regenerative, balanced, and whole.
We want to put the microphone in front of the voices that need to be heard the most right now: the farmers, the dreamers, the designers, and the doers.
So come cultivate a better world with us. We're so glad you're here. Now, let's dig in.
Welcome all to another Friday and another episode of the Good Dirt Podcast. And welcome June. To me, June is absolutely the crown jewel of the year. It's not hot yet. Today's high is 73. So it's perfect outdoor weather for gardening, walking, morning coffee amongst the flowers, picnics, long evenings on the porch. So if you feel like none of that is accessible to you, that your life is too busy or complicated, I advise you to start with perhaps simply a moment in the sunshine or a long look at a flower in bloom, maybe a few seconds pause to hear the birds, or letting yourself slow down enough for a strawberry treat. The strawberries are so wonderful right now. These are things we can do wherever we are and whatever the weather. And this is slow living. And as for slow living, as we've discussed so much on this program, so much of it has to do with slowing down enough to observe the natural world around us. In this episode, which I'm doing solo this week, I'm talking to two amazing women, Leah Rampy and Beth Norcross, who have co-authored a book to help us do just that. And it's entitled Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees. Beth Norcross is founder of the Center for Spirituality in Nature. She has extensive training and experience in both theology and ecology, and she speaks, writes, and leads numerous programs that offer spiritual guidance for developing deep, sustained, loving relationships with nature. Leah Rampy is a writer, speaker, and retreat leader who weaves ecology, spirituality, personal stories, and practices to help others deepen their relationship to the natural world. She's the founder and leader of Church of the Wild Two Rivers, affiliated with the Wild Church Network. Expanding on their popular 6-week video course offered through the Center for Spirituality in Nature, Beth and Leah collaborated on this book, integrating science and spirituality, bringing readers to a deeper understanding of the beauty and wonder of trees. You'll hear more about their journey into this fascinating world and some amazing facts about trees that perhaps you hadn't heard before. So here is Leah Rampy and Beth Norcross, co-authors of Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees.
I'm Beth Norcross. I am now an author and a speaker, an educator, a leader, a spiritual leader. I like to call myself a spiritual ecologist. I am a naturalist as well, and I have a great fondness, doesn't even begin to describe my feelings toward what Leah likes to call the living world, or the non-human part of nature. Of course, I have some affection for the human part as well. And how I got here was a long story, but I started working on Capitol Hill, doing political stuff, and then with the environmental community, and then just began to realize more and more that even within the environmental community, that we were trying to change minds. Up here, we were making all these intellectual arguments about why we should be more protective of the natural world and so forth. And it just didn't seem like enough. It seemed like we needed to sink down and really start absorbing this information from our hearts. And so that led to many years of theological school, and then finally to the founding of the Center for Spirituality and Nature, a not-for-profit that encourages people to go back out into the natural world and to see it as sacred and to develop loving relationships with her, with the earth. And so I'll let Leah take it from there in terms of how we got going on the book. But I think we could both say that we're inveterate tree lovers from way back. I actually have a degree in forestry, as you could tell from when I dug into some of the soil science in the book.
Yes, yes. Great. Okay, Leah.
Sure. I'm Leah Rampy. I live in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, in a co-housing community. And I have known Beth for over a decade before she started this center. But I will say that the work she did to start that and her sense of calling toward ecology and spirituality is very much aligned with my own sense of purpose. I was leading retreats and pilgrimages and inviting people into reflecting on climate chaos and ecosystem loss at the same time that Beth was founding the center. So I'm not exactly sure what particular event we started with, but I know at some point we began leading walks together, and Beth would occasionally ask me to write a blog for the center, and that kind of morphed into us creating a 6-session class on the spiritual wisdom of trees that is a video class. It's standalone and it's still offered by the center. And then we also would offer that sometimes with a Zoom option so that we could talk to people after they had listened to the video and had done the practices that we invited them to with their trees. In doing that, we were so affirmed that we were not the only ones loving trees and finding a real resonance and grounding and depth of communion. People who took that class inevitably made comments about feeling that they had come home. And by that, I think they meant they'd come home to the trees as well as they had come home to a group of people who felt very like-hearted with them, and they could be more fully themselves because they felt they were in this community. We were really fortunate then to be approached by Broadleaf Books and ask if we would like to write a book based on our course. We felt there was more to be said than what we had summarized in the class we were teaching. So we really loved that opportunity to dig in more deeply to some of the various themes and maybe add new themes to what we had already explored. We did it together, which was actually a great adventure. I know there are probably many people who would advise that you not co-author things, but for us, it was, and I do think I speak for both of us because we both said this over and over, it was a real example of synergy where we felt that the sum total of what we did was way more than we would have been able to do individually. And so it was a great collaboration. And as one of our podcasters said, oh, it's like you took the lessons of the trees about collaborating and worked that to offer your book. And that's a little bit the way it feels.
Yeah, it makes sense that after you develop the course and you've been talking about it and thinking about it and writing about it for a while now, that it sort of integrated into your way of being. So that expresses itself in this lovely collaboration. I've now read the book and I really enjoyed it, and I want to go back and go through it and even more. I want to dig in more. I was impressed by the way you were able to dovetail all the beautiful metaphors of knowing trees better and understanding their lives and understanding how they work in the world with real science and real biology. And I learned a lot. I learned so much about trees. And sometimes I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Some of which we'll be getting to in our discussion.
We did that a lot too.
Yeah,
Mary.
I guess so.
I didn't know that. That is so cool.
Yeah. And I'd already been on this track of being amazed about trees. Trees are always amazing, right? But when I read Suzanne Simard's book, Finding the Mother Tree, that really had me so open to this discussion about trees. And when you open up to that, and you can't help but walk around and notice more and feel more, want to know more. So I was really happy to get into your book. Thought it was beautifully done.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
Yes, thank you.
I want to go back a little bit to, as you were talking, Beth, you said you started out in politics and you became aware of this phenomenon that there was, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think this is what you meant, a very cerebral approach to the environment and for environmental problems, which is what I think you would find among thinking, studious people. But you felt like there was more, there was a need to go deeper. Like you, Beth, I feel like it needs to sink down into ourselves. All of that sort of leads to this duality we all have observed about there's us and there's nature, there's us and the trees, there's us and the ocean, and everything's like separate from us. So, what can we do, as if y'all haven't been doing it with this book and all of your other work, but what can we do as individuals here in the world and our spheres and in our communities to cultivate this more? What would you have to say about that? What would you have to say about the duality? And there's lots of words for it, but anyway, let's just talk about that.
Do you want to jump in first? I know we both feel passionately about this question.
We really do. And it's really part of what we're trying to do in the book is to break down those barriers that cause us to think and feel with more of this dualism. Leah and I had an off-camera conversation the other day about how did, when did we start? How do we get here? It's been centuries, really,
Yes.
of this increasing view of nature as resources, this sort of mechanistic, choose Descartes or Bacon or wherever it started. So we have a long and difficult road. So people ask me the question all the time, what can we do? And I always answer the same way, and I'll answer this way now. Go for a walk. Yes, there is work to be done. And those intellectual arguments are important to make, continue to make moral arguments, ethical arguments. Just go outside and ponder and reflect and look and feel and listen. Just listen. And of course, we're speaking to the choir a little bit here. We all come across people, and I've been told more than once, that's your thing, Beth. It better be all of our thing.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing after COVID, where did people want to go during COVID? They wanted to go outside. The parks, the national parks have been overrun with people in the last few years. Where do people want to go? They want to go outside. This connection, this deep connection with the natural, quote unquote, natural world, it's in us. It's just they're embers that are just waiting to be lit again. And so I think we see that when we take people outside or ask them to go outside. And Leah and I have a program, and I think it was our first one. You've been to Iona recently. We started thinking about pilgrimage to our own backyard, taking those same eyes that we take to Iona or Yellowstone or Yosemite, that same excitement and curiosity and passion, and go outside, go to your local park or go to your yard and say, and look with the same eyes and open with the same heart. Always go outside
Yeah.
and see what's there and listen.
I would end with an exclamation mark where you end, but I would mention two things. One is this is within us. We have centuries of our ancestors being connected deeply to the living world. And it is true that our worldview has overlaid a different story, and the story of consumption and productivity and competition and othering and dominion over. So we have that story. And sometimes we forget to examine that story and ask the question, is it true? And is it serving us? And of course, just going, is it true? You don't have to go very far to see what damage it is causing, not only to the living world, to ecosystems, to putting us into the sixth great extinction, it's also damaging us. And we are lonelier. We know that the Surgeon General some years ago called it an epidemic, and Vivek Murthy was going on and on about this for his entire tenure, that we are facing an epidemic of loneliness and depression and anxiety, and then overlay that with eco-anxiety and solastalgia, which is a term for when your whole environment changes around you. You haven't gone anywhere, but the environment, the ecosystem as you knew it, has changed. Our youth are facing incredible sense of loss and anxiety. So our stories of separation are absolutely not serving us and not serving this living world. So then the question becomes, what are the new stories? And the new stories are in some ways the old stories, the ancient stories that we've forgotten. And yet we know them from our childhood, because before we were introduced to, you must be separate, distinct, and individual, you must compete, we had that incredible joy in following the bugs down the street and picking up rocks. And Beth has heard me tell that in a recent retreat I did, I led a guided reflection for people to write about a deep experience they had with the living world. Now, when you offer that as a retreat leader, you can almost hear the eyeballs roll. Because it's not what people immediately like, oh, yes, please. I'm sorry, I came to this retreat, but I didn't think I was going to have to do any work. But asking them to reflect on a time when they felt deeply connected and then to share that in small groups is magic. Is magic, because we remember that separation, that story of separation, isn't a universal truth at all. That we have had these moments when we have felt connected, and it's opened us to awe and wonder and beauty. And we're so desperate for that to stay grounded in these times. And I'll just emphasize what Beth has said. So then what do? You go outdoors and you take a deep breath and you open your senses and you feel your feet on the ground and you look at the trees or the bushes or the plants or the birds or whatever is calling you, and you listen for that wisdom that is being offered all the time.
Absolutely. And we've had a couple conversations over the last year or so with Paul Hawken. I don't know if y'all are familiar with his work.
I have his book behind me.
Oh,
Carbon?
that it was just released. And in our first conversation with him, we were having a similar discussion. And what's your advice, Paul, on what to do? And he says, go outside. So that seems to be, for people who are really tapped into this, it's very simple. It's very simple. Another thing and this has come up in the Paul Hawken conversations as well, our language is so important, the language that we use collectively. And this comes up in the book, and I believe it was a Beth chapter, I'm not sure, but where we have in the past, even in the conservation community or in the environmentalism community, we talk about trees as for their benefits, how they serve us, like they're a product, and we consume, like, oh, we get oxygen from the trees and we get fuel. And I think this is a big part of it, is being very conscious of how we talk about these things. So maybe, Beth, you want to expand on that a little bit about how we can. Yes, trees are very beneficial to us, but I believe it was the chapter on reciprocity. Is that correct?
That's Leah's.
Elias. Okay. I've got them confused, but that's okay.
It's okay. We both talk about that. It
Yeah.
really should be one of those themes that weaves through the book. Yeah.
Both of
So-
you just speak to that if you are so inspired. Just speak about that. That struck me, how language is a part of this, and language specifically how it applies to trees. Yeah.
I'll let Leah speak about her beautiful chapter on reciprocity, but the idea of language, I think, is so important. You asked what we could do. I was at an event just this afternoon at a theological event, and there was a lot of questioning of what can we do in this moment. And the notion of kinship came up, and how important it was to see our other humans as kin. You can imagine I had to get my hand up there and talk about kinship in a very different, in a much more expansive way. And so part of it, even among those of us who are progressives, really need to broaden our language and our approach. There's so much, this came up in our conversation today as well. There's so much cruelty and human suffering that it's sometimes we forget that our planetary systems are unraveling as well. And so when we talk about suffering and we talk about dismantling and we talk about the cruelty, we need to broaden that to include our human and our non-human neighbors. So Leah, I'll let you take reciprocity, but I think you're onto something, Mary, there with language.
Yes, I wanted to say that I'm really glad you brought language up, because I think our stories remain unexamined as long as our language reinforces those stories of separation and othering. And so, to the extent that we talk about ecosystem services, to the extent we talk about owning property, when we talk about the land as any aspect of the land as a resource, there is an othering aspect to that. And I might have said this, I say this a lot. I had the privilege of being in conversation with you last year on another book, but I often say, once we other the earth, it is a slippery slope then to othering those individuals who live close to the earth, and then to individuals who are not like us. So we bring that othering into the human community as well. And there is no way that othering serves the good of the whole and invites us into vitality and liveliness and mutual thriving. So the language itself, when we use it, we have to start being aware of that. And Beth and I, it's one of the things we appreciated was being able to have conversations about that with each other. Is this the right language, or do we need to change? You will notice that we offer genders when we speak about trees. We don't it trees. And that comes from two places. One is really a practice where we are trying to remember to honor trees as kin and all other beings in our ecosystem as kin, and not as an it, which separates. So that's part of that practice. And then Beth from her forestry will be quick to tell us that it's actually accurate because trees do have feminine and masculine, and both sometimes on the same tree. So reciprocity, I think, invites us to notice and receive those incredible gifts that our ecosystem is always offering us. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the plants we eat that become our cells, always noticing those incredible gifts of air and water. And then allowing, because we notice deeply, allowing gratitude to arise And out of that gratitude, remembering then that we have a responsibility to give back from our own gifts. That is what Robin Wall Kimmerer would call the gift economy, right? Where everyone is seeing that they have unique and beautiful gifts to offer to each other. And we all play that role and remember in gratitude what we're receiving. So this is, to me, some of the heart of what we're talking about is a sense of kinship and the sense of shifting our language and being more present to these incredible gifts that we are offered all the time and the gifts with which we would not be able to live. We cannot live without them. So it's not just about what is given to us, but the way in which we respond and return those gifts.
Beautiful. And I remember when you started out that chapter, you told the story about the ginkgo tree. And I thought that is an interesting aspect of this idea of reciprocity. And so would you tell that story and what you learned from it? I think that's so relevant.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So we had a tree that was a non-native tree, an invasive, and yet I loved it. It was beautiful, but it became incredibly unstable, and it was right next to our house. And so we had to take the tree down, and that was very sad. And I felt we will plant more trees. Okay. And so we planted 3 or 4 trees to replace this one that we took down. But of course, then we're thinking, what tree do we plant? I looked at the ginkgo and I said, they're so beautiful. I just love those leaves. And yeah, so here we are with the ginkgo. And it wasn't very far after we planted it that I came across Doug Tallamy's work where he speaks about oaks and the incredible gifts that oaks offer to the community. And the, whatever it is, 460 some species of caterpillars that an oak can host, and the way in which then those caterpillars are needed for the Carolina chickadees that require thousands of, anyway, it's a whole system of supporting life and life supporting life, which happens naturally in the living world when we have not intervened.
Yes.
Ginkgos, not so much. Not so much.
Yeah.
I think there's maybe 4 species of caterpillars that a ginkgo supports, somewhere between 0 and 4. I was crushed because my beautiful tree was about my own sense of desire.
Yes.
Rather than listening into what was needed.
Yes.
In this beautiful space that we had volunteered in a way to support, but actually I wasn't supporting at all. So, well, we're all going to make mistakes and we're all going to have to learn. Yet what I guess is the lesson for me is to back up before I rush in, ask a different question than my question, which was, what tree do you like the best? What tree would this place love? What tree does this particular system want to be part of it? Because I'm sticking it in a community. And that's the part I missed.
It goes back to this whole idea of the duality of, and then asking, what can it do for me? And that's at the root of all of this thinking about the resources, the natural resources, and how how the resources of the trees and all the living things around us can benefit us. And it does remind me of, we've had a conversation on this show with Mary Reynolds, who you might have heard of her book, We Are the Ark. And
yes,
she calls herself a reformed landscape designer because her whole career was based on creating beautiful garden designs. And she had the revelation that it's not about creating what we want. It's about, now her mission and her life's work is to give back or to set Mother Nature free, set the earth free from our desires and let her heal.
It brings me to the question of beauty and what is beauty. And so often it's what I find pleasant or pretty. In Leah and David's case, what they wanted this pretty tree. And our friend and filmmaker who filmed the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees class with us, for us, Jane Pittman, is doing a film now on beauty. And she really delves into this. And I think this question of, first of all, I'm looking at the Virginia fringe tree outside my window here. That's just, it's native, it serves, and it is one of the wonders of our ecosystem here. And so it's so beautiful. But really thinking about this concept of beauty, and not as what serves the individual, but it's what she's finding in her exploration, and I think we are as well, is what it's beautiful to be participating in an ecosystem that serves. That's what's beautiful. And as we look out on the native trees, and I will say in Leah's behalf, she and her husband have planted hundreds and hundreds of native trees. I think perhaps in penance for her ginkgo tree on the farm that they steward. So this sense of what is beauty. And it's not just what's for our individual eyes, but what serves the common, what serves the community. That's beautiful.
Yes, and again, reflecting on the conversation with Mary Reynolds, there was this quote which has stuck with me so much since then. She says, our idea of beauty in a garden and growing things really reflects the way women have been treated for centuries and centuries. The gardens, we want our gardens to be beautiful. We want them to be contained. We want them to be tidy. And they serve us by being visually colorful and rewarding.
Oh,
And the modern idea of gardening is to work very hard to create this. Whereas the earth herself, she's not going to be tidy. She's not going to be contained. She has a lot to do that's outside of the bounds of what we consider a beautiful garden.
Yeah.
it's such an interesting concept because
Yeah.
we think about objectifying that
Yes.
garden as we objectify women.
Yes.
And we talk in the book about the sages who have taught us that about this othering and about treating plants and animals and insects as objects,
Yeah.
rather than a collection of subjects. That wonderful Jewish theologian and philosopher Martin Buber
Yes.
in mid-century made this point, that we are a collection of subjects. And so this notion of objectifying gardens, objectifying plants and trees as we have objectified women is really a very profound insight.
And if I can, I'd like to jump in on that because some of the work that I do is with our little volunteer group called Save Our Soil, and native plants is an important part of what we are inviting people to learn about and participating in. And I can't help, as you're saying that, Mary, think about lawns.
Oh.
And the object of lawns to be beautiful, and put that in quotes, please, to be beautiful examples of nobility and courtly lordship that were taken from castles and manors and so on. So we must plant this grass that provides almost no support for our living ecosystem around us. And yet, when you plant those native plants, they get a little straggly and they have an incredible beauty. But that may not be in the eye of the beholder who thinks it's all about perfectly manicured lawns. And sadly, it's not in the eye of the beholder for some HOAs that think you should have grass that's no taller than 4 inches. So there's this whole sense of, again, the story that we've created, that we live into, I'm glad you brought up beauty. It's not something we've talked about a lot, but what is aesthetically pleasing has come to us through a particular story of whose patterns we are trying to emulate and what it will say about us. So if my lawn is straggly, what does that say about me? I'm a wild woman witch, right?
Yes, yes, or yeah, something's going on in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We love the idea of I'm sure someone else has used this as a verb, but I call it meadowing. I don't think I made it up, but that's what I call it.
Good
And
word.
that's, of course, where you choose an area and you stop mowing there. It can be in your lawn or a corner of your garden or whatever you want it to be, and see what happens and cultivate a meadow. And it's a little more involved than just leaving it alone. You have to tend it. You do have to take out the invasives, the things that don't belong there. I don't know if you've taken out your ginkgo tree. I'm not suggesting that you should, and maybe not. Maybe it's not doing any harm. There's a whole continuum of things that are not doing any harm and things that are doing harm. And we all have to make these many decisions if you're involved in this sort of project. But every day I encounter the conflict, the tension, and I can blame it on my husband who loves to mow or the neighbor who stops by and said, "Aren't you worried about ticks?" But I have to struggle with it too internally when things don't look as neat or anything. And I'm constantly reminding myself what I'm doing. And funny story of a good friend of mine in West Virginia. She was doing this meadow project in her yard, and she had a neighbor stop by and say, "Are you all right? What's going on in there?" There was something terribly wrong that she had neglected her yard. It's just not something that's easily assimilated into the culture. And Mary Reynolds' solution is put up a sign, tell people what you're doing.
Right,
Use an
right.
arc or those natural habitat signs and all that. But anyway, I'm doing it in a lot of my yard, and this is the third year that I have been meadowing, and it's a real adventure. It's also like a journey in my own mind, what I'm trying to do. And it's a bit of work to create what it is that we're trying to do, which is help the earth be herself. Oh, I did want to say something about what you said about the idea of kinship. Was it in this book that one of you talked about the biological similarities between humans and trees?
I think I mentioned that, just the DNA we have in common. Carrie Newcomer, who is a pretty well-known folk singer, you may know her, was kind enough to endorse our book. And she had something on her Substack. She said that she had tried a practice that would have been suggested to her. So when she goes out into the woods, she introduces herself to the trees. And of course, people think she's crazy, but that's okay. But this idea of saying, "Hi, my name is Beth, and I'd like, what's your name?" Perhaps it's a red oak or it's a white oak or it has some other identification. But what that introduction does, and I like that so much, and if I had heard it before we wrote the book, I'd like to think that it would have made it maybe in the sequel.
Yes.
But this notion of introducing yourself, because it's the first step in relationship, isn't it? If you meet someone whom you don't know, as I was at this meeting today, "Hi, I'm Beth." And then that person reciprocates, and this is my name. And again, then a question about what you might have in common. How do you know so and so? But just that introducing yourself to a tree, I love that exercise as a first step. I think when we ask the question what to do, it's not an inappropriate question. I think I would love if we started with, how should we be? How might we be? How might we be?
Yeah.
As opposed, we're so looking for action. What's our
Yes.
posture? What's our perspective? What's our stance, if you will?
To got to get past that fix it mentality, which we also talk about that with Paul Hawken, which the fix it, what can we do to fix this? Which he says is a very kind of patriarchal thing. And as you say, Beth, how can we be? How can we be? And as per our conversation from just a minute ago, looping back a little bit, we acknowledge a kinship with a tree. What if it's an invasive tree? What if it is a tree that is actually doing harm? And there are some that are really disrupting my local ecosystem, and mine is similar to y'all. I think we live in we all are in the mid-Atlantic region. So how do we comport ourselves with the invasives? And people will argue all over the place. Some invasives do have certain roles to play, and we can incorporate them in, and then some really need to go, and then some can stay. So anyway, what do you think about that?
Oh, that's such a great question. Can't say that I love it, but it's such a great question because it's a hard one. And I think that we remember that most invasives are not here because they came here of their own accord.
True.
They were brought here in some way by humans, intentionally or unintentionally. And a lot of that landscaping, as you talked with about Mary, as you talked with Mary Reynolds about. Yeah, a lot of that landscaping was intentionally bringing exotics here too.
Oh,
and then they, having no competitor, were set free. So I think if we are really in a conversation that is filled with curiosity and a desire to know better and an understanding, like a humility, knowing that we don't know. I don't think we know the answer to that. We've had that conversation about Ailanthus in our community.
Is that the tree of heaven? Oh yeah, I wasn't gonna call it by name.
Yeah, you didn't want to humiliate that tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a difficult conversation. And I think that how do we be in that? I think we have to be very curious about what would be right for this ecosystem. I think we have to be very humble that we don't really know what is necessarily. And then I think there is this challenge of getting to know this particular location well enough to know how much harm is being done. Because as you said, there's a whole range. Ginkgo is not particularly invasive in the same way that Ailanthus is. It just hasn't, it's been here for thousands of years, but not
harmful.
It's not eliminating native species.
Right.
So there is no, as my understanding, and you should answer this from a more scientific perspective than I have, Beth, but there's no clear guidance about this. People, as you said, Mary, do not agree. And that's true whether you're talking about native plants or trees. So I think it's deep listening. And I love the careful reflection that you're bringing to it, which is what is really right to do. It's not a simple answer of let's remove all invasives, because you may end up with nothing but bare ground. And bare ground is not a particular improvement if you want to talk about water and soil. Beth, let me pitch it to you. I hope you have more wisdom than I do.
I actually agree with you wholeheartedly that we need to listen to a particular site, even within a large ecosystem, and ask, what would you have us do? What is your desire, or the desire of presence, of spirit? We haven't talked about that too much for this landscape. The Ailanthus is a troublemaker in many ways because she does take over and, as we know, crowd out native species. I was very humbled I was waxing eloquently, as I am wont to do from time to time on a walk, about non-native species and the importance of eradicating them. And we sometimes can be as violent and vicious as liberals trying to do the right thing as those who might be on the other side of this. But a woman who was a recent immigrant said to the group, she said, that language about being native and non-native and not belonging. And she said, that's hard for me to hear.
Oh.
because I have heard this so many times. What is the place? What is the place for the non-native? And that really humbled me, and it didn't change the science, but it changed my perspective on how we have to approach these kinds of decisions, but also these conversations about natives and non-natives and invasive non-natives and what they're doing to the ecosystem. And we're hearing a lot of rhetoric around non-natives, what they're doing to our collective ecosystem right now. So I agree with Leah that we really do need to be very careful and humble and just and be with humility. And I personally think there's a time when it's appropriate to remove. And let me just say I have removed a number of ailanthus trees. And I hope that we'll proceed with modesty and humbleness and always listening.
Yeah. And there's a spectrum. There's old growth forests who really have learned to take care of themselves. And they really tend, I think, not to invite us in to make waves because they are figuring it out. They have such capacity that other forests that have been adapted or, let's say, decimated and replanted in some haphazard way by the humans who are supposedly caring for them don't have that capacity perhaps to care for themselves. We just have to look. There's a whole range. And that's part of that getting to know the place that surrounds you.
I love that idea of deep listening because I don't care how many books or podcasts you listen to on this topic. Their advice and how to and what to do, it's all over the place. And so, yeah, what is left but to be where you are and to listen very deeply. And again, the kinship. I love that idea of establishing a kinship and recognizing that our life form is not that different from that life form. It's not that different from all of creation. And that's, again, the problem where we think we're special and humans don't have to follow the rules of nature because why? ... So this also reminds me of that bit in the book where, again, I'm not sure which chapter it came out of, but the whole effort, the whole thing about planting trees, like we can chop down as many trees as we want to develop shopping centers and so forth. As long as we replant, we'll just replace what we take out. And this seems to calm people down and think, okay, they're replacing the trees. But there was a bit in there about why this is maybe not the best approach. So either of you can speak to that. I thought that was interesting. I really learned something there.
This idea that a tree can be replaced, first of all, even the word replaced, it's a new tree. And I think Leah speaks to this in the book, but I know it has become rationalization for harvesting of old growth forests in particular. They're not absorbing as much CO2, so the theory goes, as the younger trees. So let's put a whole lot of younger trees, notwithstanding the fact that it's going to take them 20 years before they really start to absorb much CO2. So we need to be very careful with that, both from a practical standpoint, but also from a rationalization standpoint, as you suggested. The other thing, having worked for a period of time in the forest products industry, you can plant a number of trees, 400 or 500 to an acre, whatever that might be, that the mortality rate among these new trees is very high. And what are you planting? The questions. It is very difficult to replace a forest.
This comes out a lot in Susan Simard's book.
It does.
Yeah, the mass plantings and the trouble with those and what they often fail.
Well, and everything that depends on those older trees goes down with them. And so you're not just cutting trees, you're cutting a forest and everything that depends upon it
Yeah, I just want to add that and put an exclamation mark on what you just said, Beth, because it is about relationships. Trees are in relationships. So when you cut a single tree, you are cutting relationships. And that may mean that tree that was connected and perhaps giving nutrients to so many other trees is now gone from that forest. It may mean simply that it leaves an open space. And so there's more light that gets in, and invasives can spring forth. It may mean then that you do not have a place that's covered. And so the mosses and the ferns and all of those spring ephemerals that we're so loving now are not going to grow there because the soil is drying out. And the soil is drying out and that's spreading to other trees. It's a series of relationships that we are harming when it looks to us like we're just taking out this tree and I'll plant a new one.
Yeah, and again, we're looking at the tree as it rather than
Mhm.
individual, and I realize that's a big leap collectively. It's a
Mhm.
big leap. And those of us that are delving into these topics more on a regular basis, that's something we can embrace. But in terms of government policy and all this sort of thing, I think we're might be a long way from shifting a bunch of trees to individuals with relationships in complex ecosystems that are all interconnected. And then when we do away with them, it causes a lot of damage. But I think two things in the book that struck me that might encourage this sort of understanding of trees as individuals was and this really struck me as rather dramatic was the arboreal scream.
That's yours, Beth.
There are scientists who have done these studies that when a tree doesn't have enough water
Mm.
and that it's drying up from the inside out, that there's a rubbing that happens that sounds like a screech or a scream. We talked earlier this morning with someone about sentience, and our sense of sentience, that the animals that we can identify with, we tend to have more empathy with, because when an animal screams, we know it's suffering. She's suffering, he's suffering. And what does it mean when a tree screams? It's a cry for help. It's a it reminds me of a newborn grandson, and his screams are so visceral and so innate, and so I need food. I need food and I need it now. And so that's what reminds me of this tree screaming. No, it's not a baby's scream for food, but it is the same response. It is the same. I'm hurting
Mm.
and I need something desperately. And it's survival.
Yeah, I would love for everyone to know this, to know about this phenomenon. I think it would have an impact on a lot of people that maybe don't think about these things so much. The idea that it's a living thing that feels stress and expresses it, I think is really profound. Profound to me. Yeah.
It's the beginning of empathy, isn't it?
Yes.
And
Yes.
compassion. And how does one begin to develop that relationship? It's through compassion, it's through empathy.
Yeah.
We have a practice in the book that I think you may have seen called, we encourage people to find a tree or have a tree find them
Yes.
and ask the question, what is it like to be you?
Mm-hmm.
And so we ask the question, what's home for you? And what are you afraid of? What do you fear? And importantly, am I doing anything to harm you? So the screaming tree it's just an example of a different type of sentience. And part of our job, I think, is to really learn the language of trees, those of us who are tree lovers, that they may not cry out in the same way a human would, but to be sensitized to how and why and when they cry out, and be willing to respond.
Yes. And you talked about the exercise in the book. Leah, you want to talk a little bit about how you all have structured the book so that at the end you give these wonderful prompts to help assimilate the information?
Sure. Our chapters are broken up around trees and their relationships, really, is where we begin. So there's the opportunity to talk about soil and water, for instance, as we've already talked a little bit about. But then we begin to talk about some of the lessons of the trees, some of the wisdom, and some of how then we might relate. And so it may be things like gratitude and reciprocity, or resilience and healing, or how we find hope together with the trees. And at the very beginning, we invite people to consider, as Beth has already said, this tree teacher. And that is a process of wandering somewhere near you and seeing where you find a resonance and where the tree is resonating with you. Not to look for the beautiful tree or the tallest tree or whatever, but what just feels like there's some connection. And to ask if that tree is willing to be your teacher, and to stay with that tree as you read the book. And so at the end of every chapter, we have a few paragraphs that suggest how you might return to your teacher tree, and perhaps the conversation or the observation that you might have. There's a line in a poem that Beth laughs at me because I quote it all the time, but you must ask to know it and be known. So you must ask to know her, and then to be willing to be known by her. And this is where we also introduce the concept of anamkara, a soul friend, that ancient Celtic practice of having someone who knows you so well that they can look with you at how spirit is moving within you, and be able to hold up a mirror for you to see that. And so we posit that trees could be an anamkara for you and you for them.
That's beautiful. I have not identified my teacher tree here yet at my current place, but as I was reading the book and thinking about a teacher tree, what loomed large in my mind was a tree I grew up with. And it was said to be the largest and oldest tree in our small town. And it was a Chinese elm. I have no idea if it was invasive or what. I don't know. Nobody cared back then in the 60s.
Right.
But we built a deck on the back of our house, and to preserve the tree, my parents had them just do a big hole in the middle. So the tree spread over the deck, and it had all these wonderful branches that we climbed in, and it was like a guardian. And it was tall enough for the branches to be right outside the upstairs bedroom windows, and it had a swing on it hanging from a branch. And I have a very vivid memory of lying on my back and pushing this swing back and forth across my body. And there was nobody in it. I was just pushing it and looking up into this tree and just thinking about things. Yeah, it was pretty cool. And in later years, decades later, I heard that it was diseased, and the family that had bought that house had to take it down, and I was very sad. And in times when I've been back on that street that I grew up on, and I realized the tree's not there. So it was a teacher tree for me back then. But
Sounds like it's still teaching you.
yeah, it's very vivid in my mind. So there are a couple of questions we always ask our guests, and you can take turns answering or not answer, or however you want to. But the first one is, what does slow living mean to you? Because this podcast is really about slow living. The Good Dirt is about slow living in many ways. So anyway, what do either of you or both of you have to say about slow living, and how does that play out in your life right now? If it does.
So I'll jump in if that's
Yes.
okay, Beth. Yeah, there's two things that occur to me about that. One is, this is a very challenging time not to get caught up in the sound and fury of all that is going on around us, which means to me, and for my own health and well-being, but I suspect I'm not alone, that it is more important than ever that I slow myself to ground, to root deeply in the here and the now and in the what is mine to do. So that could be another one of those stories, Mary, that we've talked about, right? That is part of the dominant culture. That's not slow living, right? The story is about productivity and moving quickly, and we've got to get a lot done. And I appreciate what you're intending to bring to this world is a way of savoring moments, savoring activities that we do, savoring what we eat, savoring some of the beautiful things of life. Please, do you not think trees know a lot about slow?
Oh,
Think about your trees that are living for hundreds and hundreds of years. I was on some property last weekend with these beautiful old oaks, and they're about 300 years old. Think what they have seen. They know slow living. So it's both the importance to me of if there ever was a time to slow down. Things are urgent. We understand that, but we run the risk of not knowing what is ours to do if we don't slow ourselves and listen. We run the risk of trying to do things without being fully grounded and present if we don't slow down. And for sure, the trees can help us with that.
thank you so much. Yes. So, Beth, what would you like to say about slow living?
I would like to confess that I'm really lousy at it. And when you asked the question, I could feel myself. I have
It's okay.
scheduled my slow living from 6:30 to 7 every morning. And I was actually thinking the same thing that Leah. I was about the trees, and gosh, we've written this book, and what an example they are for us in slow going. I was up above the Arctic Circle in Alaska last summer, and these spruce trees were hundreds of years old. Their growing season was really short. And even as I say that, the growing season was short. And so what did they do the rest of the time? They rested.
Oh, wow.
And there are trees that grow so slowly that foresters have to count the rings using microscopes because the rings that mark those years of annual growth are so tightly together. And yet, how strong they are, those trees, because they're so tightly held together.
Yeah.
And there's not space for insects and disease and so forth. I, of course, try to spend time meditating, and I will say that as soon as I enter a forest, my pulse drops, my tension drops, and my pace drops. I've been accused of one mutual friend of Leah's and mine, who will go unmentioned, says,
Unnamed.
"Okay, Beth, we're going to go for a walk in the woods. Can we pick it up a little bit? Because I'd like to get some exercise." And so it's easier to be a slow living enthusiast in the forest.
Yes.
It's a wonderful question. I appreciate the challenge in it.
Thank you. It's wonderful the variety of responses we get to that and having people think through it. It's a good question. The other question we like to ask is what does the good dirt mean to you? And it's a metaphor or as a literally, or you can answer that any way you want because that's the title of our podcast.
Maybe you want to start that one, Beth, since you wrote The Ground of Our Being.
I wrote that soils chapter. I hope I passed muster with the good dirt people in the soil chapter. I learned a lot about dirt in writing that. And I think as I said in the book, in my soils class, 8 o'clock on Monday morning or something like that, back in forestry school, I was not a good dirt enthusiast. I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And I think what good dirt means to me now, I just want to go and sing it from the rafters, the importance of dirt and good dirt and soil. And in particular, the importance, and I think this really speaks to me spiritually, this need for spaciousness within the dirt, that good dirt, fertile dirt, dirt that can nurture, has spaces in it,
Yes.
has spaciousness, room for water and nutrients and roots and the stuff of life to germinate, and that acorn we talked about earlier to crack open. When I think about good dirt, I think about space.
And something I learned from that chapter that I guess I knew this, but I hadn't really thought of it in these terms before, is that soil breathes. I was like, oh, wow, of course it does. Inspiration and exhalation. And of course, all this talk about the carbon sequestration and all that refers to that, but I've never thought of it as the soil breathing. I thought that was very profound because it just brings home that it's a living thing. It's a living thing that comprises jillions of other living things. Yes. So, Leah, what would you like to say about the good dirt?
So below our feet, so much life, and so little we know about that life. We know it's abundant, and it's more abundant really than we can imagine, and it's happening in the dark.
Ah, love that so much.
And could I add one more little thing?
Absolutely.
Part of the good dirt is that so much of it is made up of dead stuff, and so much had to die for it to become fertile and to nurture life. And as Leah knows, I like to remind us all and remind myself that death is a necessity in the natural world, and it only serves to foster and nurture life. And it's such an important part of the cycle. And it gives me so much hope to know that there's all this dead stuff, organic matter and inorganic matter in the dirt. And that's the stuff, that dead stuff is the stuff of life. And that gives me so much hope.
Yes, and you write about that very eloquently in that chapter on death in the book. And I also thought it was very poignant how you said you'd been struggling with the idea of eternal life in your theological studies. And how did you reconcile that in the reality of the death all around us, of the dead trees and so forth? And then you had the insight about how the dead things foster future life.
Yeah.
Not that answers it all completely, but
It's enough. It's
yes.
absolutely enough for me.
Yes. And something else that occurred to me, like while we were talking a while ago, and again, addressing this, how can we as humans understand our connection and belonging to the natural world to the degree that would really help us make the shift as humans on the planet? All the living things in the dirt, the million of microorganisms and so forth, they're finding out more and more as a direct reflection of what's in our own bodies, in our gut, and the health of the soil, the life in the soil has a direct impact on the life in our bodies. So we're so connected that way, and that's very sciencey. And so that's something that perhaps more people can understand. That's the cerebral thing, but like in our gut is reflective of the good dirt, the soil.
I just want to give 4 quick sentences that the wonderful wise elder Joanna Macy says. It's all alive.
Okay.
It's all connected. It's all intelligent. It's all relatives.
Love it. That's beautiful. Okay. Anything else you ladies want to add to the conversation, or anything what you want to leave our listening audience with about today, or anything? This is your chance.
Beth and I don't know whose turn it is to say this because we both find ourselves saying it often, but we didn't understand what times we would be facing when we wrote this book. We had no way of imagining. And yet, as we are in further conversations, we just find ourselves longing to be in more conversations with people and to share what we've learned and what we hope others will find not only informative and exciting and maybe filled with awe and wonder, but will provide some sense of an invitation to breathing more deeply, finding patterns of resilience, grounding ourselves, and imagining how the trees can really support us in these incredibly challenging times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
So I'll
you.
turn it to you, Beth.
My theme was very similar, that how much we can learn and be guided by the trees during this time. They are so resilient, and they inspire me to be resilient in the circuitous paths they make, but always moving toward the light. So tempting now to not move toward the light. But they tussle and turn, but they are always moving to the light. And the last thing I would say is that one of the things that we learned as we were writing this book, and speaking of soil, how much is going on underneath the ground that we don't know about. Those ideas and those groups and those seeds that are being planted and are germinating right now that we don't know about, so that we can trust and have some faith in the fact that the mystery is working beyond our sight right now. And that's one of the things that I've learned from the trees, that so much of what will awaken us and that will give us hope and that will nurture us and calm us and move us past this period, and I tend to think that we'll get past it most days, is potentially beyond our sight, beneath our feet right now, germinating.
Yes.
And that gives me such hope. And I hope that the trees provide that to others as well. And goodness knows we could use that right now.
Absolutely. I find that very helpful. I do. And I thank you. And I thank both of you for coming today and
Oh,
spending
thank you.
time with me and telling us and telling me and our audience about your wonderful book and all your work. And I think I would love to have another conversation down the road. There's so much in this. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mary, and for
Thank you.
all the work you and Emma do, which is, we know, lots of dedicated hours to it, and we're really grateful.
Yes, a real labor of love, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, indeed, it is.
Thank you for tuning in, calling in, and spreading the good dirt. We love hearing from you. You can reach our listener voicemail at 443-459-1950. That's 443-459-1950. You can find this number in our show notes and in our Instagram profile.
This show is produced by Lady Farmer, a slow living lifestyle community, and the original music is composed and performed by John Kingsley.
For more from Lady Farmer, follow us on Instagram at We Are Lady Farmer. That's We Are Lady Farmer. Or join us online at www.ladyfarmer.com. We'll see you next time on The Good Dirt.
Goodbye.